I was stressed out.
Modena and Bologna are two cities in Italy. Modena and Bologna both boast incredible culinary traditions, world-class luxury automotive hubs, and stunning historic architecture lined with UNESCO-recognized porticos. Located just a short train ride apart in the Emilia-Romagna region, both cities share a vibrant university energy and an authentic, less touristy Italian charm. Yet these two used to hate each other, and fought a war known as the War of the Bucket. In order to understand the War of the Bucket, we have to look back at the early stages of Christianity. As we all know, around probably 33 was when Jesus Christ was crucified. He would be resurrected 3 days later. He told them that they must wait for the messenger, which is the Holy Spirit. He also said that he would return someday. Afterwards, Peter would be considered the first to start the Christian church, also recognized as the first pope technically. Of course, he would eventually be crucified upside down, with many other disciples being crucified, beheaded, or killed. Early popes were heavily persecuted under the Roman Empire. After persecution, they were heavily controlled by secular kings and nobility. For over 2 centuries, the Byzantine emperor basically decided who became pope. Then we go to the Dark Ages, a period where noble women controlled the pope, and we got some very bad popes. At this point in history, the pope was a very weak and corruptible leader that was regularly used and controlled by secular leaders, as a tool to increase their own power and influence. In a major event, what happened in the year 800? Charlemagne, the ruler of France, would be crowned the first Holy Roman Emperor. Charlemagne's crowning as emperor was certainly an historic moment, but it also created a bit of an interesting problem. It set the precedent that, from here on out, only the Pope could crown an emperor. But the Pope was also very much under the influence and control of Charlemagne. So who really held the power here? Over time, the two didn't become much of good of friends anymore. To make matters worse, the emperor had taken to investing his own bishops and abbots. What does that mean? Well, allow me to explain. The problem for the Holy Roman Emperor wasn't really an empire. It was a nightmare federation made up of hundreds of counties, duchies, bishops and more. Often they didn't give the emperor their loyalty. The German nobility spent their time rebelling against the emperor, while he spent a lot of his time putting down those rebellions. So he decides to destroy many of these nobilities out of their land and replace them with loyal people, usually close family. The emperor invested his own family and loyal followers into powerful church positions and thereby was able to increase his own power and authority. Not only that, the highest bidder were paying their way into power. Around the year 1050, a series reformist popes came along and they said enough was enough. They wanted to stop the emperor from abusing the church and investing his own church officials. Of course, if they did try to stop him, they would be deposed. Then he gets to tuberculosis and dies. His successor Henry IV, who was 6 years old, took over. Obviously, child emperors means opportunity. Pope St. Gregory VII signed the Dictatus Papae, which gave me a live political power like he alone can depose or reinstate bishops. Of course, when your emperor was a grown adult and heard about this, he wasn't happy. He then decides that he wants to depose the pope. Eventually, the German princes took advantage of the situation, and they all turned against Henry. Henry was forced to apologize to the pope. The whole conflict, known today as the investiture controversy, would continue on for centuries as popes and emperors engaged in a power struggle over the emperor choosing his own church officials. The pope would begin to have his thumb over Europe, and would have political and economic control over Europe for a few centuries. A lot of times, countries were going to the pope for stuff like going to war with other countries, coups, and much more. The pope would continue to dominate and heavily control Europe until the 16th century, when the Protestant Reformation would happen. Now we can get to the main part of this video. The Holy Roman Empire was put into further chaos and civil war, as the local princes continued to increase their own power and independence. This was most notably the case in northern Italy, separated from the rest of the Holy Roman Empire by the Alps. The emperor's influence and control over Italy was always very questionable. In the current chaos, these Italian city-states began operating almost entirely independently. Their practical independence was further solidified when Emperor Frederick Barbarossa came down in 1176 to try to reassert his control. The cities formed an alliance, and with the Pope's support, on May 29, 1176, the Lombard League, an alliance of northern Italian city-states, decisively defeated the imperial army of Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa near Milan. The emperor was unhorsed and his troops routed, a humiliation that forced him to officially recognize the League's autonomy. The Pope versus Emperor conflict was having an extremely big impact on society in northern Italy. Across Italy, families and cities were torn between two opposing sides. On one side, the Guelphs, who supported the Pope's cause, on the other, the Ghibellines, who supported the emperor. These two sides struggled for control, as Guelph cities battled against Ghibelline ones. As usual, personal interest played a pretty big role, as pro-Pope Guelph cities tended to be rich mercantile ones who didn't like the emperor's taxes. The Ghibelline were agriculture farmers who saw the papal states as a larger threat. Some would choose their allegiances. Some cities would sometimes choose allegiances according to what was the most politically and economically beneficial for them. Your allegiance also started to affect more than just your pro-church or pro-empire leanings. It affected what taverns and shops were allowed into, what cities you could trade in, how you dress, and what side you put your fetters on your hat. It even affected the way you cut certain fruits. The allegiances of some cities to its party became so strong that you could tell what party the city supported by just looking at its coat of arms today. If it had a white cross on a red field, it supported the imperial party. If it had a red cross on a white field, it supported the church. It also escalated during the 67-year Holy Roman Emperor succession crisis, when I couldn't simply agree on who would be emperor. Some cities would sometimes change sides, depending on interest change, or who was in charge. In some cities, brutal fighting broke out in the streets, as opposing families fought for control, and also led to petty fighting and rivalry between different families. This inspired what would eventually become the poem known as Romeo and Juliet. Two city-states in particular that got caught a long-standing rivalry was the emperor supporting Modena, and the pope supporting, bucket-loving Bologna. These two cities had bad blood between them, as they had already fought against each other on a number of occasions. In 1249, the two sides took part in the Battle of Fossalta, after which the victorious Bolognese launched a live donkey into Modena to humiliate them. 4 decades after that, the two sides would occasionally raid each other. In 1325, the Bolognese went on one such trip and laid waste to some farmlands. The ruler of Modena, Passerino dei Bonacolsi, was not gonna sit down and take this. The Bolognese had 2 major forts protecting their city in the southwest, so Passerino, in retaliation, decided to take an army down and lay siege to Montevideo. The person defending the fort was secretly on the enemy team side and decided to give the fort over. The Bolognese were pretty unhappy to lose one of their main defensive forts. Now this is where a legend happens to have confused people. The war starting because Modena stole Bologna bucket, that supply the city with water, is actually not true. In fact, the bucket wouldn't be stolen until near the end of the war. The reason why the two declared war on each other was probably because 1. They hated each other, 2. They supported opposing factions, 3. The Pope had called on Guelph cities to attack Passerino, and Bologna wanted its fort back. Bologna had a large force, much larger than what Modena could muster up, so they felt pretty confident. They sent half their force to lay siege and take back the fort, and the other half took defensive positions to prevent the Modenese from crossing the river. The smaller Modenese force were struggling to find a place to cross, so they tricked the Bolognese to move their forces near the river. This was so to move towards the fort without their reinforcements. The Bolognese were probably expecting the Modenese to come and break their siege. But instead, the Modenese went for the second fort at Zappolino. Bologna couldn't afford to lose both of its defensive forts, so the entire Bolognese force moved to take defensive positions at Zappolino. When the Modenese arrived, it was already late in the day, and there were about 2 hours of sunlight left. In most medieval battles, at this point both sides would set up a camp, rest for the night, and prepare for battle the next day. But the outnumbered Modenese decided the only way to win was to deal a quick decisive blow while the Bolognese were still unorganized and unprepared. They charged at the Bolognese line, and the two sides engaged in fierce combat. Then the sneaky Modenese pulled a trick to destroy the Bolognese. They sent the cavalry from the side, and hit them from behind. Then the Bolognese went on the run. Modena had won. The Modenese cavalry chased the Bolognese cavalry all the way back to the city. After Modena's victory, they went on a tour of the Bolognese countryside, burning some stuff down along the way. When they reached the city itself, instead of laying siege, they set up a camp, and basically held a massive party for 3 days. The defeated Bolognese could only sit back and watch, as the Modenese force began packing up and getting ready to leave. They noticed something. There was a bucket that was used for the city well. So to make them angry, they took the bucket. They just straight up stole it just to make them angry. So Modena stole Bologna's bucket and put it up on display in their cathedral, eventually moving it to the city hall, where it remains on display to this day. Seriously, I am not joking you. The Palazzo Comunale di Modena has the same exact bucket on display, and you can tour it. So if you ever go to Modena, I would tour it. The two cities came to a peace settlement a few months later. Bologna would have to pay heavy war reparations, and in exchange, Modena would return all conquered territories. Modena kept the bucket, Bologna had 2,500 casualties while Modena suffered 500. The battle, however, in itself didn't really change the problem with the Pope and the Emperor. All it really changed was Modena now had Bologna bucket, for the larger power struggle between the Pope and the Emperor that would continue for some time and would play big parts in a lot of medieval history. It would lead to events like the Crusades, the Protestant Reformation, even Enlightenment in the 18th to 19th centuries. I hope you actually learned something in this video. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and also, if you have any video requests, leave them in the comments section below. Bye.